Yes, recording has started. So, hi everyone. Welcome to our event hosted by Deep Tech Showcase. We're going to start with a very brief round of introductions, and then we're going to get to the interesting part. Here in the panel, I'd very much be happy to introduce. We have Ian Taylor. He's the CEO of Simba Chain. Ian, if you can raise your hand and say hi. We
Hello.
have Carl Hutter. He is the CEO of ClickBond. Raise the hands here. We have Abdul Mulberry. He is the CEO of GA Telesis. We have Peter Lengio. He is the CEO of Safran USA. And we have, last but not least, Rory Gonzarski, CEO of Alitheon. I am Yoav or Joe. I'm the least useful person in this conversation. I am just the moderator. In this panel, we have cumulatively, I think, more than anywhere between 30 to 60 years of industry experience. And the reason we are here today is this is a discussion and kind of panel that started, if I'm not mistaken, at Wharton University or a similar panel. And because Deep Tech Showcase is about an order of magnitude better than Wharton, we decided to take the panel here to make it online. So it's also recorded and other people can see it afterwards. The actual reason for the discussion started when between the 5 people that are here in the panel is a host of problems and solutions, both in supply chain and counterfeit, that I'll let the people in the panel talk about, but it's basically surfacing a lot of challenges that are here in the industry. And we're going to talk about how big are the problems, how we're trying to solve them. I'm going to be poking some questions and trying to get some better clearance on that. But before we dive into the questions, I'm going to let the people in the panel at no actual order try to introduce themselves in 70 seconds or less. So anybody wants to start, go right ahead. All right, I'll tell who needs to start. Ian, I announced that you will start first.
Okay, great, thanks. So Simba started off as a DARPA proposal, and initially we kind of set out to make blockchain kind of easier to interface with by building a platform. But since then, the Simba suite now comprises of 2 kind of core components which are relevant to the discussions today. The first is basically a decentralized permissioning layer to data. And the way we do that is we create identities for people and for data. And then we have credentials that basically give people access to that data. And the way we've implemented that is using a smart contract on a blockchain, which is non-changeable. So the actual authentication or authorization piece is non-changeable. So it's kind of like an unhackable authorization to data. You can think of it that way. And the second piece is to do with data insights. So we've built a process within our system that kind of captures every transaction that comes in and labels it with source, sink, and why it happened. And then we can build those up to create quite complicated graphs. So you can ask questions like who accessed what and when and why they accessed that data, for example. Or you can also build up supply chain use cases like company A orders a plane from company B, which has a sub-assembly, which has 2,000 components, which is like multiple tiers of kind of ordering down the supply chain. You can model that as a complete graph. So the data comes in and transacts within that structure. So one query can get access to everything across the supply chain. That's Simba.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Ian. Peter?
Happy to be here. Yeah. I'm with Safran. Safran is a tier 1 supplier to the aerospace OEMs, not just for commercial aircraft, but for military aircraft, rotorcraft, business jets, etc. And we do everything from nose to tail, inside and out of an aerospace platform.
Nice. Abdul?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Abdul Mulberry. I'm founder and CEO of GA Telesis. GA Telesis operates in 5 divisions across the commercial aerospace sectors. Replacement components being one of our largest, component structural landing gear maintenance being another, engine maintenance being another, and aircraft financial transactions financing and leasing being our fourth. And then finally, our digital innovation group, which is what we're talking about today, that focuses on creating technologies to support the next evolution or the future of our industry. Much like Ian, we have been focused on a blockchain platform, decentralized ledger process that allows for authentication. We've been in this process for well over 5 years, but a lot of the pieces that we're missing are really being introduced today. The difficulties that we had early on in having the sort of resources available to make a system that actually worked are now being introduced through Web3 and other technologies that we're incredibly excited about. And you know, from our perspective, we want to team up with the organizations on this panel to help deliver to the industry what it needs to protect itself from the bad actors that are requiring us to even do this.
Thank you. Carl?
Sure. Well, ClickBond has for almost 40 years now been a innovator and a supplier to the global aerospace and defense industry, predominantly in the OEM space, also in the MRO space, but really serving as a tier one supplier and across the tiers, mechanical hardware components and assembly solutions. So that's structural fasteners, brackets, systems installation hardware, but I think more specifically, it's been process critical technology, namely the use of adhesives to bond fastening, bond devices in place versus doing drilling and mechanical fastening. What that's really given us in this context is a front row seat to not only the aerospace assembly and maintenance challenges, but also the supply chain challenges as a key participant in that. So as part of my digital tools initiative that we've been spearheading for the past year and a half or so, we're really looking at saying, how do we take that 37 years of experience where the plane, the part, and the person meet when we're accomplishing these process critical tasks, and look at an evolution of digital tools, whether that's mixed reality, IoT tools, connections back and forth to the single source of truth in a PLM or ERP or quality management system, and the aspect of provenance and authentication of parts, but also who did what, when, and how. And by the way, where are the parts at the moment become very key things that we see an amazing opportunity to apply technology to solving. Never mind the workforce challenges that are emerging right now. How do we train people up quickly and give them the relevant information to learn and then execute their jobs?
Thank you. And Roy?
This is actually pretty cool to hear everyone's introduction, because I'll describe Alitheon as the glue that connects the physical and the digital worlds. We, in essence, fingerprint things. We can take pictures of things and serialize them without having to have a barcode, QR code, marker, invisible ink, holograms, and all the other additives or proxies that are trying to be added to products in order to serialize them. We just do it with a picture, kind of like fingerprinting people, which means that everything that the team members here are talking about can be achieved, and connecting that physical part to the blockchain that Ian and Abdul were talking about. So that's what Alitheon does. We do it in aerospace and defense, but we also do it with luxury goods, precious metals, pharma, etc.
So thank you, everybody. It looks, based on what you're saying and the companies, for the people on the panel who aren't aware, before this discussion, it looks like we have two major problems. One of them is, how do we manage the supply chain and kind of handling inventory and the process of manufacturing? And everybody here mentions a lot about bad actors. So take your pick. Who wants to start? Give a little bit of brief of how bad is it in the industry? It's just somebody putting a part that's not from the main supplier, or walk us through, take your pick. How bad is the industry and why should people care and know about it?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Look, this has been going on since the beginning of my time in the industry. You know, if you go back in time in the 1980s, and that's before my time in the industry, there was a situation where an airplane crashed in the mountains of Colombia. And some Colombian drug lord heard that aircraft parts are high priced, so he sent a whole bunch of people into the jungle, took all the parts. They ended up in Miami and being resold in the market as aircraft parts to airlines. Used repairable or used serviceable material to airlines. That's my first recollection of ever hearing about this this sort of action happening in our sector. But over time, technology has made it easier. So back in those days, it wasn't easy, but the certification requirements weren't that stringent. And over time, over the last sort of 30 plus years, there have been more and more documentation requirements that airlines and end users require in order to install a part on an airplane or in a jet engine or a subassembly. The problem is that as costs continue to go up, these parts are more and more expensive. And a single part, a single engine blade on one of Peter's engines could cost $50,000 for a single, and there's 70 of them on in a particular stage, and there's 13 stages. So do the math. It's a lot of money. So these bad actors through technology today are using things like Photoshop to alter documentation that can dupe even the best quality system, ours included. We were duped. I think Peter's company was duped. A number of airlines were duped. And
what does that mean? If I get
well, we bought parts to install in jet engines in our engine maintenance operation, and those parts were misrepresented as being in a condition that they were not. So they were being represented as being new parts, and they weren't new parts. They were refurbished. Now, what does that do? Number one, these are jet engine parts. It's a major safety risk. When what's most important in our industry is traceability, and in engines, back to birth traceability. So in this particular case, the bad actor, he falsified the paperwork and sent the part. The part made it through inspection because the part did pass all of the measurements and the requirements of our quality system, but the part was not new as represented. So we misrepresented to an airline that we installed a new part into their engine. That airline was comfortable with our representation and started to fly their airplane with that part in it. Now, very luckily for us, in the particular case, the airline, the engine was not flying when we discovered it and notified the airline. So it was easy from our perspective to rectify the issue. But there were airlines across the world that had 20, 30, 40 engines affected by these parts that were not in the condition as represented. Luckily, there was no incident, but the cost was significant. Immediately upon notification that these parts, there were suspected unapproved parts in these engines, the airlines had to ground the airplanes, had to remove the engines and send the engines back for maintenance to remove the suspected parts, which is a major undertaking and a major cost. So look, that just brought attention to something that we've been working on for the last 5 years, and many of those on this this podcast have also been working on, because we see the risk. But beyond the risk, there is a benefit. There is a benefit to revolutionizing our industry in bringing a tracking system that allows us to get rid of reams and reams of paper that we call back to birth traceability. Those reams and reams of paper could be automated into, let's call it, creating or tokenizing the data And I think Ian can talk to it a lot about how to protect that data from ever being altered. And once it is in that sort of tokenized state, whether it's through, our system is using NFTs and making instead of selling a part, we're selling an NFT, and all of the data, all of the history is in that NFT. It's located within that token. And we transfer that from an airline or to an OEM, and it's got perfect information. The cool thing is now that you add this image serial number that Roy has created, now you've got the paperwork and the component, because there is still, even with perfect paperwork, without that digital image, without that digital serial number on the part, you can still swap a data plate and no one is the wiser. So it is very important that all of us on this call work together towards developing the next evolution of traceability, both image-wise and document-wise. Thank you.
If I could just add some color to Abdul. First of all, for the audience, I hope no one takes for granted Abdul's transparency. I mean, first of all, I applaud that, Abdul. Not many in our industry or any other industry would say, yes, we were also duped. So that's why I view you as a role model for this industry. But thank you for doing that. To add some color, Abdul talked about back in the 80s and then this case now, just to give a few more items. The FAA issued warnings against fake TCAS, traffic collision warning systems, fake Rockwell Collins ones made by the Russians. Chinese parts were just found just this month on US military F-16, F-18, F-22s, and Apache aircraft. Some folks in San Diego were caught selling fake parts to US Navy nuclear submarines that were installed on the submarines. That's just in kind of this last few months, let alone the case that Abdul was talking about. There's also fake pharmacy, fake medical equipment that also, by the way, goes into military and everyone else. This problem is getting bigger and bigger and riskier and riskier. We're not talking about the proverbial Rolex watch fake or the Louis Vuitton bag you buy on the corner of Canal Street in New York. We're talking about airplane parts, car parts, pharmaceuticals, things that when you get wrong, actually risk and impact people's lives. As Abdul says, by the grace of God, that no accident actually happened with these parts, but we were lucky this time. Next time, we may not be so lucky. And to put a fine point you have on, you said there were kind of two issues, supply chain and bad actors. I actually think it's one issue. If as an industry, be it aerospace and defense or pharma or any other industry, if as an industry, we can actually manage our supply chain in a way that every item is in fact serialized and traceable, the bad actors can't do anything. If we are able to identify every single part, then no fake or fraudulent parts can come in. So the problems are actually linked.
So if I could for just a minute, I'll add to this, and again piggybacking on what Abdul was saying. We weren't duped, but our customer was, and that's the same to us as far as that's concerned. The next steps, as we discussed up at Wharton, and Abdul's keenly aware of this, is the Aviation Supply Chain Integrity Coalition, which we're all members of. There's several engine OEMs, even though it just happened, I won't say just, even though the AOG Technics issue happened on engines, every system on an aircraft is going to be affected by this with a susceptibility for false parts. This coalition has brought together all the players, all the actors who can be quote unquote duped or be engaged in this type of activity, obviously unwillingly. And right now, I think the status is that they're in the process of drafting the first draft of the report, the readout, and I believe we're targeting a September release date. But that's how going back to what Roy was saying, that's how I think we as an industry can grab the reins on this issue and kind of stop this runaway horse, with methods and tactics and training and procedures that will make it increasingly difficult for folks, bad actors, to step in. There was one question, wouldn't the bad actor immediately have the
Yeah,
reputation?
I wanted to bring it
They
up.
don't care. They're in it for the money, and they will run as soon as they're paid. So that's not what this issue is. It's not a reputational business. We had a security company that when we were in the security business doing TSA screening and subverting detection systems, one of our competitors dropped their screening device. Think of the imaging devices that you use when you go through TSA. And one of our competitors put their demonstrator in the hands of Homeland Security, and they unbuttoned it, and it had several fake parts from China. And this was over 10 years ago. This was almost 15 years ago, for gosh sakes. Roy, you're right. This isn't new. It's not going to stop as long as it's remunerative.
So
But I think we're taking steps.
So I'm assuming there's several types of bad actors. There's the sub-suppliers who's just trying to make a quick buck or trying to reduce the expenditures, or they're not buying from the original manufacturer. And then that point makes sense. No, if they sell a part and then their reputation is ruined, then they're out of business. The second question that I'm interested in is this a 1% or 0.5% problem that freaks out the entire industry? Or how big is it actually in dollar terms? How big is it in an amount of incidents?
If I can jump in, it's a 0.5% problem, but that 0.5% problem can kill hundreds of people, and that's the issue. So that 0.5% problem, and it's not even a 0.5%. It might be 1/100th of 1%, 1,000th of 1%, but one part can bring an airplane down. And whether that's a $500 million fighter jet, or a $400 million passenger jet, or it could sink a submarine. Whatever it is, it's not the financial risk we're after here. The financial risk is just, there's small numbers. It's the safety and integrity of our industry that we're trying to protect. Now, I'm sorry, Ian, you were just about to say something.
I was just going to give some color around the numbers. So I looked this up earlier. So the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development reported that counterfeiting represented $461 billion a year, and that's around 500,000 customers affected.
So it's
it's a lot of money, but as Abdul said, if your wife is on that plane, you don't care what percentage it is.
Right. And I think that's, if that's a theme you hear here, you hear it with passion and for good reason. I think it's part of what makes those of us who support this industry, aerospace, defense, high performance platforms that are mission critical and life safety critical. Everybody here rightfully has this passion around driving that to zero. And anything north of zero is unacceptable. And I think that's why investment to this end is really key. Now, from our standpoint, some of the things like those, sophisticated turbine blades, certain LRUs, certain subcomponents just by their nature are very difficult to fake in a physical way. But as you've heard, there is misrepresentation of their condition, their life cycles consumed, all sorts of other things. But I'll give you a perspective from something that's a little more humble and, elegant, if you will. Not elegant, they're all elegant, but simple in its design and manufacture. And that is a structural aerospace fastener. To the layperson, the bolt, even to the aerospace mechanic, the proper 220 KSI bolt out of a reputable manufacturer and something that looks awfully the same but is nowhere near the same performance-wise are very easy from a physical attributes and visual inspection standpoint to swap for each other. And so I think that when we talk about components that really are on the surface easy to interchange visually, and once they're installed in the aircraft, incredibly difficult to detect and to replace, because you're now buried into the big bone structure of the aircraft. nipping this early and with confidence is really essential. But I want to just take a second to maybe put another spin on the bad actor side, just to give a different perspective. There's a huge piece that is critical to keep fake parts from getting into the right airplanes. There's another piece, which is making sure that the right parts don't get into, that the good parts, the real parts, don't get into the wrong airplanes. And I will share with you that this is of real meaning to a company like ClickBond, who supports the warfighter and the defense sector very proudly. We recognize that part of what we deliver with our hardware and our technology is an advantage to the good guys, and that we don't want to compromise that, and we don't want to be part of lessening that decisive advantage that our customers have in defending our country and our allies. Now, imagine what, if you will, when you have these millions of fastener products flying around the world in the supply chain. Diversion to call it less favorable customers, debarred parties, programs that I think everyone here would not want to show up on and benefit. How do you stop that? And it's very difficult when you are just relying on people's representations of end user certifications, again, paperwork. It is very easy in the interest of profit to divert one of those streams, especially once you have exported the product legally to an international, say, distributor who now has the right really to do what they wish with those parts. If you want to go the extra mile and say, I want to make sure that that's not happening, I think things like blockchain controlled and tracked transactions, immutable transactions like that, coupled with that link to the physical product with certainty, are about the only way I can think of to solve that. And so I'm very excited to see that other end of the telescope, how we can even keep the best products from going to the wrong places.
And Carl made an important point and distinction. While I don't think there are two problems, as in supply chain and bad actors, there's actually one problem. There are two aspects of it that Carl pointed out. There's the physical item, which could be fake. It could be real but used, as Abdul pointed out. It could be real, new, but going to the wrong place. But it's the physical item. And then there's the data, the provenance that goes with it. You could have good data, protected, unfiltered, kind of as it should be. You could have really bad data, fake data, like we saw in the AOG Techniques case and others. But whether it's good data or bad data, you need to make sure that the right data is connected to the right physical part. Bad data with a bad part, real data with a bad part, bad data with a good part, all of them can create risks. So you need to make sure that you have the right data with the right part. And that's where the bad actors come in, or bad management of inventory comes in to create havoc.
And Roy, you bring up a very important piece there that's less sort of safety, critical and more economically punishing. As we know in this industry, the most perfect, beautiful part without its paperwork, put it in the dumpster. It's worthless to the real, authentic supply chain. So I think what you just touched on is another important part. We have suffered in the industry loss of value through perfectly good parts to where the paperwork either was lost, somehow corrupted, what have you, and now there's no confidence in trace. And now that's
last year, the Inspector General of DoD found that Lockheed Martin and the Air Force had lost 1 million parts of the F-35 program. You don't lose parts. You lose the paperwork or the data of the part that makes it unusable. And who pays for that? The taxpayer and mission reliability.
That explains maybe it costs why $100 million. But
another risk that is coming down the line is since the sanctions were imposed on Russia has started to fabricate parts. They've started to make parts because they can't get them. Very dangerous for them to do it. I think someone mentioned earlier TCAS systems that are being manufactured. Basically, they're being cloned off of U.S. or European manufactured technologies. At some point in the future, and hopefully sooner than later, the conflict will end, the sanctions will go away, and there is going to be a plethora of aircraft parts that were made in Russia, made in China, made in Iran, that are going to hit the market, and those bad actors can create paperwork that would represent those parts as being mainline parts available for installation on an aircraft. That's dangerous. That's scary. The Russians have great technology. They have great resources, but they didn't spend a decade creating the engineering to build a jet engine. They basically in 6 months copied it, cloned it, manufactured it, and they have no choice because of the sanctions. They're going to use it. That's not safe. And unfortunately, whatever they do in their country is their business. It's none of my business, and I'm not judging. I'm worried about what happens when the sanctions get lifted and those parts start to trickle into the mainstream. And that is going to be difficult if we don't have that. And that is where the paperwork enough, what Ian and I are doing isn't enough. That's where we need Roy's digital image serial number to prove that this part was never manufactured by a company like Peters. That it starts there. The birth of the part is where it all starts, and it's tracked from then through its entire evolution. And that evolution in some cases could be 40 plus years of use, of perpetual use. There are parts that go on airplanes and engines that don't get removed or don't get replaced for 20 or 30 years. Mm-hmm. So even it's a risk on a 20 or 30-year-old airplane that a suspected unapproved part is installed.
That's a great point, Abdul. We're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the CFM partnership with GE. That's incredible. But to your point, about last time I think we counted noses, I think about 60 to 70% of those engines from the original CFM series are still flying.
Oh.
So this problem does not go away. Another issue, and the regulatory issues are one thing, but we have a difference in opinion between the EASA authorities, primarily EASA and FAA, on inclusion of what we consider to be proprietary data in our ICAs and CMMs. And if you want to talk about giving somebody a blueprint to cheat, that in my opinion is a good way to start.
So can I play devil's advocate in this discussion? So everybody here is bringing up. So sorry for cutting you off, Peter. Everybody here talks about the problem has been starting from the 70s and 80s. The solutions are move pieces of paper. So supposedly everybody can say, wait, when I got this, I can trust this piece of paper that I have. The problem is huge. Yet on the one side, we're freaking everybody out, supposedly. And on the other hand, 99.5% of the time, things are still working, things are still okay. Is it just prayer? And based out of that question, what solutions are you offering? And why does that actually solve the problem? Because if they've been trying to do these solutions for 40 years, what is the difference now?
So I was going to kind of touch after Abdul said touched on this, but this needs to be digital, right? Because there's no unique binding you can make between paper and a part. You can at best put a serial number there, but that's not kind of representing the physical attributes of that part. So where kind of Roy's technology comes in, they take a photo in this case, but there are other techniques like X-rays and even neutron interferometry and so forth that can capture the physical structure of the part along with the surface, right? And each part is unique. So if you bind that to the digital, you've got a true kind of unique binding between those different, the digital thread and the actual physical attributes of the part.
So what's wrong? When you say what's wrong with the serial number, what's wrong with the Bluetooth scan? Yeah.
Yeah. So all these additives, you think of why do governments, airports, et cetera, why do we get fingerprinted? Because they don't want to trust the driver's license that I can buy in Hong Kong that has all of the anti-counterfeit aspects to it. looks brand new. The government just caught in Hong Kong, I think it was 100 million actual driver's licenses from the 50 states of the United States being ready to be shipped here, probably to be sold to one of two aspects. Either teenage kids who want to drink underage, okay, or bad actors who want to enter the US and do things in the US with so-called legal documents. That's why when you want to enter high-end facilities or go through the airport, they check your fingerprints, because your fingerprints have two aspects to them that make them special. They're unique. Even twins have different fingerprints, and they're inherently embedded in you. You cannot give them away. No one can take, if you believe maybe Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible, okay. But for the most part, you can't fake fingerprints, take them, copy them, unless you cut off someone's finger. Very similarly, parts already had that fingerprinting system. So serial numbers, paperwork, barcodes, QR codes, laser etching have all already been proved since the 80s and up until 2 weeks ago to not be reliable. For that, to Abdul's point, 1,000% of a time. But more and more planes are flying today versus the 80s versus the 60s. More and more people are flying. More and more routes are being flown. More military aircraft, more submarines, more ships, more boats are being used, which means that that small percentage represents a lot of people's lives being put at risk. I mean, think of, the latest, my previous employer, the latest fiasco with the two 737s that crashed. If you think about the two planes out of the millions of flights that happen a day, percentage-wise, it's nothing. But to the families of those people who died on those two planes, it's a big something. And so really back to the question of, it's not about the 99.99% of the time it works. It's about the one time that it doesn't and the impact that it has. And having to be able to connect physical and digital becomes critical.
And Yoav, to address, you asked a very specific question about, the inherent risk. So aircraft are designed with double and triple, even sometimes more redundancies for safety reasons. They're protected. Every aircraft in commercial operation can take off and land with one engine. So the issue is the perfect storm, where they have an engine failure unrelated, and then another issue, the other engine goes out because it has a suspected unapproved part. That's really what we're after here, is the integrity, protecting the integrity of the platform, of the aircraft, of the jet engine, of the system. Look, you can have a TCAS system, a traffic collision avoidance system, which is a computer that tells, so the separation in when airplanes are flying, the separation between aircraft today is very small. There are a lot of cases where you look out the window and you see an airplane flying right under you, 1,000-foot vertical separation, right? An airplane could be flying right under you, and there is a system called TCAS that protects the aircraft. It gives the pilots information about the altitude, the heading, everything of the other aircraft in its vicinity. Now, if you have within that TCAS system, forget the fact that there are people that are making fake TCAS systems by replicating the technology. But if you have a subcomponent within that, a diode, a transistor, of anything that goes into that TCAS system that doesn't operate the way the manufacturer, the way Peter's company designed it to operate, and you have that one bit of turbulence or bad weather or something that happens that causes the perfect storm, then you have catastrophe. So the entirety of what we're talking about is supply chain integrity. We have to have perfect integrity. And whenever there's something that requires integrity, there are those that try to get around that system to make a buck. And that's what we're trying to alleviate. But we want to make it through by combining what we're all doing. We want to create a global system where the future is not open to entry for these bad actors. They can't do it. There is no technology that'll allow them to supersede the decentralized ledger that Ian and I are creating, or the imagery that Roy is creating, or the adhesives to signify provenance that Carl is creating. So what we're doing is closing the door, trying to close the door to a violation of integrity, of the integrity of a component or of our entire industry. And then you can look at it and say, how can we use this to help other industries? We've talked about ships and rail and submarines. There's all kinds of things, like fake Rolex watches. I mean, you can keep going and going and going. But again, these fake IDs, right? So I agree genuinely that they're probably coming over here and going to be distributed among the college kids for that. But what if 20 of them got in the wrong hands of somebody coming in the southern border that isn't coming over here trying to get a better life? They're coming over here trying to infiltrate and do bad things in our country. So as this technology has so much greater scope than aviation, but we're all in aviation, so we're focused here and how to make things fly and fly safely.
Real quick, I really love the mention of adhesives and the adhesive element of what we do, because you just gave me an idea, and I want to just share it quickly, because we don't tend to think about fake structural adhesives going into the supply chain. That's for another day. But it's a great example of another aspect of many of the products that we're all involved with, shelf life limited materials. By having a lock on that cartridge of adhesive, by having its transactions and movements securely controlled on a blockchain and tracked, with the addition of a little bit of extra magic through a time temperature integral tracking tag or what have you, we'll have confidence in the supply chain that that cartridge of adhesive never sat, for a week in the back of a 110-degree tractor trailer and spoiled in a way that might not deliver the proper outcome. And of course, when we talk about seals, when we talk about packings, all these other things, there's a lot of things that have to have conditional storage. And it's another excellent place. Maybe not. I mean, around safety of flight, sure, but also economic loss and disruption to supply chain when we're working in a world where the supply chain, as we all know, is hand to mouth. We're looking to fight against labor availability, resource availability, all the other supply chain constraints. Boy, we really can't afford to have a whole batch of something get trashed because we didn't track something. Sorry,
we see that in the world of pharma that we also work in, pharmaceuticals that have expired. How easy it is, and we see it. Bad actors will grab those packages, erase the old date, print a new date with a really nice printer, and sell it back to small and mom and pop pharmacies, online pharmacies. It's not even fake. These are real but expired pharmaceuticals that people are then ingesting and hoping that it helps them. Now, maybe it's expired by one day, maybe it's expired by a year, but things like that are so easy to do. That's why, again, locking in the data and the physical, both are so critical to make sure that pharmaceutical or airplane part is what I think it is, and the data associated with it is what it should be.
So because
extend
go
that.
ahead.
Yeah,
you've been the most polite so far.
Just to give the folks in the audience a technical perspective of what this looks like, I think that would be helpful. So Roy's system, you can take a photo. So I know you said no phones, but you could take a photo of a part, and that captures, basically using the surface of that object, it captures a feature print. That feature print uniquely represents that part, such that if there was 1,000 other parts that were identical in our eyes, his system would still be able to tell them apart. Now, that alone, protects the part, because on the other end, you can apply the same process. You can take a photo of the part and you can see if it's authentic, if it was registered prior So that's the end-to-end thing. But however, if you integrate that into blockchain, what we represent that feature print as is an NFT, and the NFT provides ownership, because that's basically a digital signature of the feature print, which is a physical representation of the part. Now, if you think of digital signatures in data, if I send you a data set and I attach a digital signature with that data set, when you receive the data set, you can take a hash of the data set, use my public key to decrypt that digital signature and compare the documents. That proves that the document hasn't changed since it left, that it left me, and it proves that nobody else could have sent it except for me because of that digital signature. We're doing exactly the same thing for physical parts. By wrapping them in NFTs, you're having that digital signature for that physical object, and that enables, through the blockchain, enables the transfer of ownership from the customer, from the supplier to the customer. And there's a lot of other advantages, but I thought I'd walk you through that process because that's what we're talking about here. And the other aspect of this that's kind of interesting is, along with that NFT representation, which kind of represents the ownership, you can also attach other stuff to that NFT. And that's what we've built at Simba, this capability of storing data, which isn't on the blockchain, but it's associated with the blockchain and bound into the same constructs, such that you can package digital twins and the digital engineering thread along with that part, so it can traverse the whole journey of the supply chain from supplier to the customer. So that's kind of like an end-to-end view of what that looks like from a,
So can I, because everybody seems excited to be doing this together, can I give some pushback? There's the problems of how the industry is looking now, and there is the amazing 100% application of the solution in the future at some point in time. What happens in between that you have, and I'm interested, Peter, Abdul, Kar, I'm interested in your perspective. What happens in the middle during the transition period? We have paper, we have this. What happens between now till the industry in its entirety changes?
We get better and we punish those who do wrong.
Yeah.
Visibly, forcefully punish those who did wrong.
Yeah, look,
across the entire supply chain of thousands
any bad
of
actor
suppliers.
who enters into this. There's two things going on as far as the perception is concerned, and Roy's hitting on it as well as Abdul. Passengers, we all fly all the time. You know it. You get on a plane, we're 5 minutes late taking off, people get angry. The magic is gone. People don't understand how hard this really is. They don't appreciate the level of effort that goes into making that actually occur. So you have a customer base that thinks this is just magic. You guys do what you do, but I'm getting on the bus and it better take off on time. And then we as industry folks have had, I think to a fault, have been too assuming of honesty among our suppliers. And all of that needs to change. Because as Roy has pointed out, as these aircraft multiply and the level of the amount of the percentage of public that is a flying public increases, it's that percentage of risk grows exponentially. Somebody put a question on there about the space shuttle, et cetera. My brother was the secretary for the Gaiman investigation and the return to flight task group. This has all happened before. This is nothing new. Those weren't false parts. Those were parts that were made in good faith by people who were dedicated to the task at hand. We have to guard against both good faith actors and bad faith actors.
Do you force the new solution down the supply chain?
Well, it has to. It has to start
Absolutely.
with OEMs. If the OEMs don't start at the birth of a part, then everything we're doing is reactive instead of proactive. So this has to be industry wide. The challenges are that every country has its own civil aviation governing body, its own FAA, let's say. They're all called different things. So just because the FAA or EASA, which is Europe's version of the FAA, adopts something, doesn't mean that another country automatically adheres to it. We have to go through and convince every country that this is the way to do it. There are countries that will say, no, I still want to do the paper. And that'll happen for for a period of time. They're going to want it to be proven that it works. This is really, you know, I hate to say that this is a marathon, not a sprint, but it's more than a marathon. We are completely changing how our industry is going to work in the near future, or we're trying to anyway, and how it will work in decades to follow. The technologies that are being developed are only going to get better and better. So this is going to be an evolution. But today, in my company, for a part that has been refurbished to be resold and shipped to an end user, 11 sets of hands touch it. That's how much scrutiny a part gets. And even with that, a part can get through. If somebody is really good, a part can get through. We're making sure that that doesn't happen by creating this decentralized ledger where we can go through and verify that a part actually belonged to the person that provided it, or the company that provided it to us, and verify where they got it, look through its entire lineage. And with the systems that we're creating with these decentralized ledgers and these tokens, these digital twins, we'll be able to see the entire history of a part. So if someone provides us a part, we wait, this last the blockchain shows that this part's flying on an American Airlines 737. How did you get it? And it could be legitimate, but at least we're asking the question. We have the data to ask the question. They say, oh, you know what, American, they sold it to us last week. You can verify, check this way. And that may be the case, but it allows us to ask the question. Today, that doesn't exist. We don't have a reference point.
So I think kind of building on that, well, a couple things. I think there's going to be two sides. One is the hard requirement that's going to have to come from a government or international. ICAO would be the answer for commercial aviation if you want to span national authorities. But even then, as we know, even the US doesn't abide by all of ICAO because we know best, right? That's not a surefire thing. But wherever it comes from, governmental agencies or an elected group of primes and tier ones saying this is how we're going to do business, and we're not going to do business with suppliers who don't play, is going to have one role. But there's also got to be the carrot side and the incentivization side. And I will speak on behalf of the many, many, many small and medium manufacturers down to 5-person mom and pop shops who do beautiful work across the country, around the world, to support this industry, right on up to Airbus, Boeing, Lockheed, Northrop, BA, and the rest. Okay, we need to make sure that there are appropriate and and cost realistic on ramps for people at all parts of that supply chain. And in fact, that's part of what, as ClickBond looks at this as one of those growing but small manufacturers or medium manufacturers, is really keenly aware of, because many of those companies are actually our customers doing sub-assemblies and buildups. And so we're thinking about, as we talk about our digital tools platform, perhaps to incorporate this type of technology in the offering, is how do we provide a low load on-ramp to these technologies and the supply chain standard. There's another word that we got to dive into, how that evolves, and where does it have to be standardized, and where can it be different? Because if we have something that we have to have everything figured out across the supply chain, the life cycle, and around the world before we can do anything, we never get there. So there's going to have to be some malleability and some standards that we can get on board that don't have to all be the same. But that economic incentive is really going to be key. And I think it's going to have to come from committed OEMs and tier ones to actually say, we're going to, in the interest of all of us, incentivize and make able the sub-tiers to get on this thing. Now, the good news is, I think that the funding to do that is inherent in this technology as well. And we've been talking about the really critical issue of safety of life and safety of flight and mission assurance, which is absolutely the right place to be focused. But the economic aspects in the supply chain are very powerful. And I think they're what can fund this effort and make it real. What do I mean here? So we talked a little bit, I shared the example of, you know, the fasteners that lose their paperwork and are now junk, right? Or lose whatever the provenance link is, and off they go. But Roy also talks about, you know, the lost fasteners. There's a little more to that is really near and dear to my heart, you know, from what we do, and I'll share this. You would maybe be surprised, but the way that the types of products that I and my peers in the industry produce, Class C components as they're called, which I don't love that word, but I don't know where it came from. But you know, the hardware and fastener aspect of things and subcomponents are not really tracked today much differently than they were tracked when it was you know, bucked rivets going into, you know, Boeing 727s by the pound in some cases, right? And even though some of these components now are hundreds of dollars per each, the tracking is really not much different. So what that means for me is I know what we produce. I know what we ship to either our OEM customer or sub-tier customer's warehouse or to a distributor. And they know what the distributor shipped to, you know, the end user customer. But once it leaves the big, you know, Indiana Jones style warehouse and goes out to the shop floor, in very few cases do we really know how many parts have been consumed and are sitting out in the on the shop floor, might be expiring in the case of certain types of materials, or might be lost. And there's a powerful concept here where if we can cause the occasion to know that one of those, and specifically that one of those, was consumed in this transaction, because, you know, apropos of what we've seen, unfortunately, in some of the supply chain issues, were the 4 plug door bolts tightened or not? We are going to need, and the industry is going to demand, a higher level of certainty that, as I said at the top, these processes are actually completed in the right way by the right people using the right parts. And as that paradigm evolves, there's now this opportunity using the blockchain and image Alitheon type technologies to actually say one of these was consumed. And that is going to be a big boon for supply chain efficiency, whether that's, you know, eliminating shrinkage and waste, or whether that's just being able to synchronize the supply chain so we don't have the historic aerospace bullwhip effect at a time when labor and materials are precious and the economic constraints are just all the more keen. That's going to be the pay for here. Is if we can bring the whole thing together, I think that we will end up with much more efficient supply chains, and the dollars saved in optimizing how we engage across those tiers, across the life cycle, I think will yield, you know, enough to make this happen and more. That's my take for how maybe we get everybody on board. But I will say it's going to be a mix of the carrot and the stick, and we do need to make sure that there is the right mixture of both to make this real for players of all different sizes.
Yeah, I
Anybody?
have to agree with that. Look, we've been focused a lot on safety and security and integrity, but the efficiency element of it is absolutely key. In our aerostructures division, when we open up a bag of fasteners that might have 100 fasteners, if we use 40, we throw 60 away, because we don't have a way of tracking those 60, the documentation related to the remaining 60, because the 40 may have been used for one customer and the balance would have to be used for another customer. Well, each customer wants to see the certification. How do you split that certification? You can't. Today you can't. Legally you can't. You shouldn't. Regulatory wise, it's not a crime, but you shouldn't do it. So we'll throw away 60 fasteners, and who pays for it? Well, the customer that consumed the 40. They pay for 100 because that's the quantity. If we had a system of tracking it where we could, without any sort of question, say we used 40, 60 remained in the container, the certification is tokenized, and it's in the blockchain, and it's there to verify for anybody, then we could use those other 60 and have complete integrity of the components installed on 2 different customers' assets. That would be fantastic. Today, it ends up being waste because we throw them away. and we bill the customer for 100 when they only consumed 40.
Well said.
So we're just about to wrap it up. Kind of fine. Obviously, we'll share the recording afterwards with the people that are registered, and we'll be able to distribute it. Anybody wants to make a bet before a full solution is very well integrated in the industry?
I will bet.
Timelines?
I will bet that the luxury good and collectibles industry does it before aerospace does it, which is a sad statement.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a long time, but I'm very excited to be part of the initial stages of it, and like I said, I think we're going to together create something as an industry that supports what we're trying to do, and new technologies like Web3 has really revolutionized what we're trying to do. It's a new technology that comes in, and then maybe there'll be a Web4, or maybe there's something else out there that's going to continuously allow us to increase the capabilities and functionality of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the takeaway is that, and we see this all the time, we're moving more and more into a digital world, but we still live in a physical one. When all of us here on this panel are going to get on our next flight, it's an actual physical airplane built of actual physical parts, not digital ones. And we need to make sure those physical parts are the right ones, the correct ones, the legal ones, the authentic ones that have the authentic, real digital data that goes with them. If those two don't match, the new digital world and the current physical world, that's when we have problems.
Yeah, I don't know if I can. I don't know if I would want to get into the despite being in Nevada and get into the gambling around when, but I'd say, you know, sadly, but maybe necessarily, the events of the last 6 months remind us that it creates the context to accelerate this, and it's maybe the swift kick in the ass that we all kind of need to take it that last mile. I think the speed of adoption will be really based on how quickly there can get to be the appropriate level of consensus standard around the blockchain aspect, I'd say particularly, and then how can we lighten the load to on-ramp things that are already there. So is there a way, as was mentioned earlier, to get, say, a roadable that is out there through a reasonably lightweight process that maybe doesn't give it the green future badge of approval that says all of this was tracked from its birthday, but gives it at least the yellow sort of a known good actor with known audited practices, did an evaluation or a super evaluation, and has represented. We've got to create on-ramps for all stages. If we wait to say every part has to be born into the system, we will be a lot longer. If we can create the on-ramps, I think that the urgency of need, we'll see meaningful amounts of this happening by the end of the decade.
We don't know the birthday. We know who the father is.
There you go. That's an interesting way to put it.
Well, as we said, the coalition report is targeted for September, so that'll be very interesting to see what our experts, and I know who ours are on our side. They're senior engineers in the aircraft engine business, and among the brightest people on the planet. So I think that we will get beyond the edges and start going down a track of rectifying this dangerous behavior in our industry.
I would just say, like, over the last 10 years, there's been a massive effort in the digital engineering, digital twin realm that is encouraging, because it's bringing in this kind of level of kind of digital models that can be packaged up and delivered with assemblies. And that's kind of an encouraging start. Now, when we start interconnecting those from one company to another, that's kind of like the starting point for creating a transport that can be used to do all this stuff we're talking about today.
So thank you everybody for joining. You can join the event on LinkedIn, and you can see the panelists if you want to reach out to them directly. We'll be sending out the recording afterwards. And Thank you very much. This was fun.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thanks
Thank
for a
you.
great conversation.
Great pleasure. Good to
Great
see
to
everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good to see
We'll see you. Bye-bye.